hello everybody. I'm Peter Winstanley. I'm one of the Semantic Arts team, but in my ample spare time, I also am involved with W3C through the Dataset Exchange Working Group. And one of the things that we're responsible for is vocabulary, ontology, for the representation of catalogs on the web. And I would like to talk a little bit about that. And so I'm going to see if I can get everything together to make sure that it works seamlessly. So if I share, then if I hit the slides,
no, we're still, yeah, there you go. Yep.
There we go. Good. So I now won't be able to see anything. So if anybody's sticking their hand up or what have you, could somebody shout out?
Yep, I'll keep my eye on it.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'll try and get rid of these things. So let's just dismiss them all. Then we're not going to get bothered by things. Right. So back in the day, people started putting together different sorts of assets of a kind of long-term record nature into things like libraries, and this is one of those old libraries, and these are the kind of assets that they had around, like, you know, tablets chiseled in cuneiform, and if our colleague Sean was around, he'd be able to read that for us. Or like with Hammurabi's stele here with the laws. So the important thing about it was that we got into the business of preserving stuff that was important communications. And they were put into particularly special places like this library. And as things grew, we needed to find a way of recording what was there and finding it. And so the technology of the day was to take old playing cards and to use those as the place of record. And as this practice grew, people improved the technology by creating cabinets of drawers with the exact measurements to hold these record cards and to enable them to be worked upon in bulk, to make it easy for the record to be preserved, for things to be searched through, for new records to be added, and so on. And so they became, in effect, the sort of catalogue. And then what happened was that we got the internet developing, and people realized that actually there was a lot of merit in making not only the data, but also the catalogues of what was available in places openly available using the internet. And it was from that that we began to get a movement to open up data assets in particular that were in private areas, even though they had often been paid for publicly. And Berners-Lee and others were at the forefront of saying, look, if we've already paid for this stuff, we need to know it exists, and we need to be able to make it available. And so across administrations, there was an interest in making this sort of stuff public. But of course, just as in days of old, we needed to have a means of recording. And that is where DCAT originated. And so I did my little bit of social history with Vasilios Peristeras, who told me that he actually was in Derry, in Galway, and he was looking at the shock vocabulary, which was the one for interlinked open communities, and he liked the approach. And so he thought, well, maybe we could do something similar for open data. And so he worked with Fadi Mali and Richard Saganiak, Michael Hausenblas, and these are all people that you've probably come across, worked with, or know of. And they then began to bring this sort of work together about developing a vocabulary for expressing the cataloging of data sets in a way that was suitable for publication on the web. And it was first of all dealt with by the W3C's sort of open government group, and they brought things together into a first cut of a recommendation, and there we had the start of DCAT. But what happened was that Vasilios moved on to the Commission, and the Commission, the European Commission, was organizing its approach towards the opening of information assets of all kinds through one of the European directives that was to do with, again, this business, that if people have paid for stuff in the public sector, then they should be able to access it. And the reasons behind it were not only transparency. The European Commission was beginning to realize that there was an information-driven economy, and there were all manner of superlatives that were talked in those days about the value of information, the new oil, and so on. And this DCAT vocabulary was recognized as being an important part of the process of making the catalogues of collections of open data widely available in an interoperable form. But it was also recognized that the vocabulary of DCAT, data catalog vocabulary, by itself wasn't enough. And so the practice developed of creating application profiles, and hence we get this this abbreviation DCAT AP, the DCAT application profile. And Vasilios started off recognizing that there were certain domains that had got an awful lot of data, and these were the statistical domains and the geospatial domains. And so work was started within Eurostat and within the Joint Research Centre and the INSPIRE team to develop domain-specific DCAT application profiles for statistical data and for geospatial data. So that was the nice bit of history. I think it's useful to kind of pull that together, something that perhaps we should do a little bit more of, because it's useful to know what the thinking was, the personalities that were involved, and the institutions and the story. So this is the structure of DCAT version 1, and it was making heavy use of Dublin Core, and we've had a number of key classes One of them, bottom left, was the notion of a catalogue. And the catalogue could be themed by a set of concepts within a concept scheme. So there was the notion of indicating what was in the catalogue using some taxonomic stuff. And what were we cataloging? Well, in this case, they were cataloging data sets. And one of the early bits of design that was recognized is that a data set, to some extent, it's kind of an abstract thing, but where the rubber meets the road is through distributions. And so there was this separation in the design between a data set that was cataloged and the distribution, the way that the particular chunk of data, which could be a subset or it could be a particular representation of it, a particular serialization, was made available. Now, just as with the cards in the old card catalog, we often need to make a few jottings in the margins about the cataloging process. And so there was a class of catalog record that was used for that, for making those notes. You can see from this that there was quite a bit of additional stuff added when people were creating these application profiles. All the core things were there, but there were additional things put in that weren't available in the core DCAT, to do with licensing, to do with things like frequency of production of a particular asset, various other things like that. Maybe also some spatial stuff with regard to location that a particular data set pertained to. And so what we ended up with is a whole number of different developments of DCAT to suit either particular nation states, not only in the EU, but also the open data assets in data.gov in the US had a DCAT catalog. Same sort of thing was present in Australia. And then there were various domains, subject domains, not just the statistics, but also areas of transportation and also of geology with the European plate. And so within each of these, what I'm calling DCAT AP species, what we saw was a number of innovations that were themes that carried out across all of the different independent application profiles. And it was from that we began to develop a shopping list for DCAT version 2. And in particular, we were looking at things like the requirement of a data service to be represented, some loosening of the constraints in order to promote reuse, which may or may not be a good thing. The benefit is, though, that what you can do is sort of tighten things up within an application profile. There was also a requirement to represent, very loosely structured catalogs, just where there's a kind of pot of data assets that are there, which occurs more often than you would think. People were recognizing that there was need to represent provenance and quality. And from that, we began with the development of additional vocabularies for data quality and data usage. There was also the recognition that there are other things on in this sort of space coming from schema.org. And so there was an alignment done between DCAT and schema.org. And what we do find is that when Google goes looking for open data assets, in addition to its focus on metadata catalogs that are couched in the schema.org terms, also the DCAT vocabulary is used as one for their crawling. And so the idea is that we represent the catalog and the catalog record, and then we've got resources which may get brought into a data set or a series. And the distributions and the services, I've drawn the analogy here with books, how we can get the audio book, the hardback, the film, the paperback, and so on. These are a bit like manifestations when we're looking at RDA. So distributions and services are the way that people see data sets, and the catalog and the catalog record are there to provide the way of finding them. In this period, we also got the development of an awareness of what are now called the FAIR principles, and the F of FAIR, findability, has found a lot of good use in recognizing that DCAT is there as an interoperability standard. It's a kernel around which people can build catalog structures where they know that there's a very good probability of them being interoperable through using these core classes. It doesn't need to be done in RDF. We see DCAT implemented in XML and the ideas of DCAT being implemented in other ways. But RDF is the lingua franca that's used in the way in which the standard is published and the way in which it is illustrated within the standards document. We use a kind of UML visualization of the structure within the standards document because it's something that people can get their head around pretty quickly. So here we see DCAT version 2, which has got to the sort of right-hand side at the bottom the data service. But the other thing is that we put in place, we removed the dependency on the doubling core data set and replaced that with a DCAT resource, which is an abstract class, and it provides scope for an extension point for other types of catalogable asset. So it's perfectly reasonable here to be thinking of having a resource being your rock collection or anything else that you want to catalog. And I think that, going forward, what we need to be doing is making the D aspect a little bit optional, because we're not only interested in data of a kind of row and column numeric form. It's a good approach towards looking at how to deal with catalogs and catalogable resources. And so I just wanted to kind of zoom in for you to see some examples of how what we have is an instance of the class, and then a chunk of metadata, and then some links. So a catalog is going to be cataloging a bunch of data sets in this case, but the catalog itself is going to have a bit of metadata about it, what it's called, homepage, the publisher, and so on. And a data set, again, is going to have a bunch of metadata and then links to distributions. And distributions themselves are going to be related to where they're available from, what form you're likely to get them in, and what size they are, and things like that. There are other things here where we link in with ODRL for rights and obligations, which is a necessary part of dealing with data. And it's the way in which we deal with it is to kind of bolt in the ODRL vocabulary. And within version 2, we brought in data surface, because it's recognized that many data sets, the distributions aren't only available in full downloads or books or whatever, but they're available through services where you can select a slice of it. And so as a kind of reprise, here I've got just a reminder that a catalog is there. It's got some metadata. It points to catalog records, which are to do with the cataloging process. And then cataloged are resources, datasets, series. The dataset has got some metadata with a pointer to the distribution. And because this is designed for availability of things on the web, there's a landing page which will tell you more about how to access that data set or the distribution. Distributions, again, metadata, also potentially the specification, what they conform to. And this could be a textual document, it could be a spreadsheet, or it could be a shackle shape or something like that, if that's appropriate, or a schema of any sort. And again, access points and so on. So what did we do in version 3? Well, there are 3 main things that were done. And version 3 is in its late stages of development. It's just going through what W3C called the wide review, which is where all the other working groups take a look at it and check that it conforms to what they're working on, and that there are not any areas where there's potential for interference. So we were looking at having a specific class for dataset series. And the thing about dataset series then is that we needed to have things to do with versions and a chaining of versions. But we also paid attention to the interest in having versioning more generally, not only within series. And what we have done is to adopt the PAV, the provenance, authoring and versioning vocabulary. But since that isn't under active maintenance, what we've done is to bring the concepts from it, to bring the model under the DCAT namespace and under DCAT management. And so the elements of PAV are now maintained as part of DCAT from DCAT version 3 onwards. And so that can be used in order to provide through the previous version, has version, and has current version properties. It can be used for developing versioning chains The other thing that we did was to recognize that a number of people were looking for inverse properties. And initially, we kind of felt that this wasn't really worth doing. But then what we realized is that people were minting their own, and that it was a better idea to act as a coordinating center, and so as to provide a number of inverses to help people along, to make sure that we were a good citizen in terms of providing an interoperability framework and minimizing the risk of people doing things in diverse ways when we could help everybody to do things all in the same way. So these are some of the references, and I'll circulate this slide stack. But that is it. What I do want to say, though, is that when we start looking at the work of the W3C working group and all the people that have been involved over the years, this is the crowd. And it does involve an awful lot of people, some of whom come along for a long time, and others who come in and do work with the working group for a year or two. And that's it.
Cool, thank you. So anyone have comments, questions?
Go back to your inverse thing.
Sure.
Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to have that history too, as well as the progression and change.
Sorry, Doug, I hadn't realized I'd stopped sharing. Can you hold on? I probably still need to hit another button. Yeah. Okay, do you see it?
Not yet. There it comes. Yeah, next as the inverse of previous. It kind of makes sense, but not in the same way that as part and is part of makes sense.
Yeah, I know. And I think that sometimes these, so this is still in draft. Okay, so what would you suggest?
I would suggest not putting an inverse property on previous. And
no, I know that, but what has happened is that we've found that people have been doing that,
That's funny.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the way you could think about it is just like you flip the direction of the arrow around. Well, that works for replaces and is replaced by.
I know.
It absolutely doesn't work when you go previous and you flip the arrow around and all of a sudden it's like, no, that doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Well, we should have a chat about that because if we're still within time to make some improvements, and these things do require many eyes, because you find that as you're going through, you can become a little bit too used to things, a bit jaded perhaps. And so it's very, very helpful to have fresh eyes on things. Anyhow, I'll make a note of that.
And the other thing as you're going to finalize this, you might want to, maybe you've already done this, put the inverses in a sub-ontology so that people who don't want them don't have to take them. Because, what we're starting to discover, some people do want to attempt to do inference at scale, and these inverses are a disaster for
absolutely. Yeah, I've done that before, Dave, and to have them as something which you can have an optional import.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Wait, were you saying, Dave, that inferences that inverses create disaster with inferencing? Is that what you're
Well,
going to say?
it's not a disaster. It just
you end up
doubles
in
the
loops.
it doubles the number of triples in your triple store
Yeah,
and doesn't add anything.
doesn't add
because
anything.
Because every one of those could have been traversed the other way. So you've doubled the
Yeah.
size of your database and gained nothing.
So
Got
you see, I think that what happens is that a number of people start putting together application profiles, and they're not really as hardcore in the RDF kind of world as perhaps they should be.
Right. Yep.
However, this is a journey for everybody. And I think that, I mean, we've had a bit of pushback in terms of bringing in data set series, because people have already been starting to do it in different ways with how they describe distributions. And it's one of the challenges of kind of bringing a global community forward.
Yeah.
That you have many stakeholders, and sometimes there are certain compromises.
Yeah, I like how you've done data set series. I think it's well thought through and covers the use cases that I know of. So I like that one, and I'm glad.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's of interest is how, for example, data.gov are basically revitalizing their interest in metadata and are going to be moving from DCAT version 1 straight into DCAT version 3. I think for a time, data.gov kind of it went from leading the pack to being an also ran, and
Yep.
now it's beginning to come to the fore again. I think one of the things that's really important for everybody who's involved in data-centric thinking is the benefits that we can get if we can get public bodies to organize their core information assets well enough for them to be truly usable. And that is where that's where the heart and mind of government is, in that they want to be developing an economy based on data. But sometimes they don't know all the different steps that they need to do, so just words are not enough, and encouragement is not enough. Sometimes what they have to do is actually dig into their own resources and bring this to the fore as something that is as important as the other things that they do.
Can you talk a little bit about how I would make kind of practical use of this? So
Yeah.
Is there tooling, anything?
So there are different sets of tooling around, but let me just go off share for a bit, and I'll see if I have a slide deck that talks specifically to that, and it would help me deal with it. Okay, I'm ready to show. Let's get going. All right. So here we go, 2 talks for the price of 1. Okay. So the first thing to do is to decide what you're actually going to do. Who's going to govern it? What are you going to put into the catalog? Do you need 1 catalog or do you need more than 1? And thinking in terms of both governance and architecture is really important as a kind of starter, because what you're going to be doing is bringing together a community. You're going to need to have certain sorts of rules and practices and so on. And these are being done in many different parts of the world, but the bits that you see tend to be mainly in the kind of open and public space, but you do get DCAT being used in other areas. The next thing that's important is to basically hook your ducks. You need to know about identifier schemes, who's going to mint them, so on and so forth, because what you want in your cataloging is to ensure that you're not getting collisions, ensure that you're getting stuff that's going to be kind of manageable. And it's useful to have some sorts of policies and agreements with regards to identifiers. In terms of the DCAT 2, we've kind of seen what needs to be put in place. So you need to be able to identify a catalog, and then using the DCAT vocabulary, if you're going to be doing it in an RDF way, what you want to be doing then is associating resources or data sets with your catalog. You can then associate services and distributions and so on with your data sets. And in the course of it, the notes in the margins, the data catalog records are ones that can be put in, well, they can be referenced or they can be brought into your catalog, and they relate to, you know, the catalog itself and to resources. And you can have catalogs of catalogs. And with DCAT 3, again, the same sort of thing as a development of series. Now, some open data repositories are able to export their catalogs in DCAT form, and that might be helpful. In terms of other tooling, if you take a look at what the European Union are doing, they are providing things like, well, first of all, they're providing application profiles, which are, you know, slightly filled out, because DCAT's like the kernel of this, the core of it, but they kind of fill it out with a few other things coming from the European Union's core vocabularies. So, you know, they're implementing an application profile with other standard vocabularies. And they're also providing shackle shapes and other things for the validation. So there are a number of tools of that sort. And there are 1 or 2 other things that the Commission are providing to help with things like the validation of files, the validation of shackle shapes, and so on. There are some other tools that are being made available. There are some pieces of work being done in Sweden on RD forms, it's called. So it's like an RDF forms that basically provide an HTML form that enables you to create a valid DCAT record and export it. And then there are other kind of pipelining things that some publishers use in order to create DCAT records of publications that they make available. There's one of them, the name escapes me at the moment, but a DCAT record is made available for every publication that they make. Let me see if I've got anything else. Yeah, so initially your catalog is there, but it's empty of resources. So what you do is that you go around and catch things and begin to start filling out the catalog with resources that you've then begun to identify as either a data set or a distribution or a series or service. And so the point here is that the very earliest step is to identify something which initially is just classified as a resource because we know that it's got an IRI to identify it, but we're bringing it into the catalog. And that process may be something that has a catalog record annotation, and there may be a particular processing pipeline. But as the resource comes under governance, it then begins to have an appropriate assignment into the class of object that it is. And at that point, you would be adding provenance information and so on. And you've seen those sort of things before. So that is basically it. You need to, first of all, get the structure right in terms of the personnel, the governance. You need to agree on IRI policies and other things of that nature. Then you need to be able to mint your catalog and then to start identifying things which are initially identified as resources and then brought in through the management process into the appropriate slots in the catalog. And there are things like shackle tools that will enable the completeness of the record to be ascertained. Does that help?
Well, I guess it helps a little bit.
So I don't know of other tooling in the same sort of way that we currently have it for metadata catalogs, but this is the sort of thing that's kind of
Data.world catalog implementation has a schema that is based on DCAT.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess what I was really curious about, whether there is actual, software that would
yeah, and
let me do some of this without me having to actually write the code.
Absolutely, and so the answer is that that there are things like CCAN which will do that. Okay, and what they will do is that they've got a CCAN or a DCAN catalog, which tends to be influenced by the thinking of the Open Knowledge Foundation. But there are export functions for CCAN that will produce DCAT compliant exports of catalogs. And these sort of things are brought out into things like the European Open Data Catalog repository, which goes around and vacuums DCAT compliant catalogs from many CCAN repositories. And the CCAN stuff is really exactly that. You know, it's a website for holding mixed data assets, sort of loose bags of various stuff that are published by mainly kind of like towns and cities. But it's also used for one or two other things, but it's used quite widely for open data catalogs in localities. And it tends to be small data, and it tends to be data that's well used within small areas. Okay. And I think that it's very, very helpful for doing that. And I think the point that I was kind of making is that there are certain other assets, like, for example, the Danish, you know, basic data for everybody, the Grunddata, you know, these sort of things I think are the products of a mature administration that sees the national benefit of doing these sorts of things and doing them well. And you find that the same sort of thing is beginning to take place within the Belgian, generally across Belgium, as we're beginning to get collaboration between the Flemish and the Wallonian administrations and Brussels City, and they've all agreed on you know, a sort of standard approach. And I think that the leadership by nation states to get core civic society data assets available, catalogued, and repurposable on open licenses is a fundamental way of getting the commercial world and the public world working together for everybody's benefit. And we see this in the way in which in Brussels and in Flanders and developing in Wallonia, how we're getting things like unified transportation options coming from the availability of open data, which is catalogued and readily accessible.
Yeah, I don't doubt for a second that this is useful. I mean, I see the value of this work.
Yeah, but the tooling tends to be designed at the moment for the much smaller operations within things like CCAN. That's where the effort came. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
But the other side of things, though, is that when you have something like that, what you have is the European Open Data Catalog, and you have Google in their open data, in their harvesting of catalogs for open data, where they do begin to pull things in from many repositories and begin to start harmonizing it. The other thing that European Open Data Catalog does is that it does statistics and quality analytics and other things like that that are helpful. And I think that this is something that increasingly the publications office is going to be, you know, focusing on as they take a stronger position in steering the member states of the EC in their data works, you know, because they've developed this policy of having about 11 or so specific areas for their data spaces, and you know, the cataloging of those assets and the sharing of them across data spaces is really key to the policy initiative.
So Peter, you were suggesting the data.gov has somehow moved up the rankings, and I just went and
What
had a
I'm-
look. It's still terrible.
What I'm saying is that they have been in discussions about moving to DCAT version 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause what's out there at the moment is
Now,
ridiculous.
what's out there at the moment is bad, and they know that. Okay. And the difficulty is that within the US, as with many other countries, these sort of things get done on a shoestring budget. And but no, my comments earlier, Dave, were to say that they are making moves to bring about improvements in their stuff.
Good.
We've been
Good to have good intentions. It's always
Well,
good
no,
to have
it's
good
more-
intentions.
It's more than good intentions. It's 2 or 3 real people that are working on it, you know, which is better than just having words in a policy document where you don't know that anybody's got the job, you know?
Yep. Jonathan has his
Yeah.
hand up.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, I was wondering, has anyone done any mapping between GIST and DCAT? I know there's not much crossover, but might be a little.
Well, there is a GIST software, which is not publicly available, that totally maps to it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
You know, because
So-
it has, you know, the data structures and the metadata, how data sets and metadata and databases and stuff are connected.
How would I get access to that?
You'd have to say pretty please and, you know, stuff
Okay.
like that.
Thank you.
Well, anyone have last call? Anything else? Thank you,
One-
Peter. Oh, somebody said
What-
something?
One quick question. Peter, have people used DCAT for like inventories, warehouse, personal inventory, stuff like that? Or is that really more an edge case? I would guess it is an edge case that's
So-
really off.
One of the things that the Commission is using it for is as part of the catalogue of services. And, you know, I think people are recognizing that we can use it for wider things than just simply data sets, you know, or that one can see so many things around as kind of data sets, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that what you're talking about there, Jonathan, is absolutely spot on. You know, when you want to have the bones of an interoperable catalog structure, it's pretty much got all that you would need. And you would want to flesh it out with stuff, and that's what people do. It isn't recognized that it's, you know, that in itself, it's a complete solution. The idea is that you take that and build on it.
Right.
And that's where the application profiles are important. But what happens with application profiles is that when we see things that are done across many application profiles, it then seems to be worthwhile to bring it into the core.
Right. Right. So if someone wanting to do that would go shopping through the application profiles, find the one or ones that are closest
Or at
suited.
least, yeah,
or
or at least get the idea
there.
of what you can do. So
And extend
within
from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Within the semantic assets of the EC work, if you look under the semic stuff, I mean, there are core vocabularies which are really kind of like, you know, mini upper ontologies for things like person, registered organization, and location, and various other things like that. And these all get bolted onto DCAT in various ways in order to create something much much wider use, because invariably when you're talking about a particular data asset, it's going to be relevant to a particular geography. There may well be people that are relevant in terms of the governance of it and so on, and it may well be published by a public or a registered organization. So these are things that are brought in from pre-existing ontologies in order to ensure that the full output is interoperable.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, really last call. guys.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to everybody for listening to this. I hope that you did find it useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Very